This episode is brought to you by the Maizul Arts and Culture Center. Because their Wolf Theater Academy is inviting students kindergarten through 12th grade to explore acting, musical theater, and improv in a professional, inclusive setting. Students can explore 2-week sessions spotlighting popular plays, including Disney's The Little Mermaid, 10 Ways to Survive a Zombie Apocalypse, and Seussical Jr. I wish I could invite you to enroll your kid in their Wizard of Oz Youth Edition, but it is already sold out, so you better act fast. They also offer a technical apprenticeship that lets teens master set building, lighting, sound, and props behind the scenes. Faculty and guest professionals foster creativity, teamwork, and self-confidence in every student. Enroll now at jccdenver.org/camps/WTA and let your star shine on stage. That's jccdenver.org/camps/WTA. And don't worry about that URL. You can find it in the show notes.
Hey, before we start the show, I want to give you a little reminder about Heyday, our indoor fair with a distinctly Denver twist. It's less than a week away, Saturday, and we're running out of tickets. So head over to heydaydenver.com to snag yours today before they're gone. We'll see you Saturday, March 8th. Today on CityCast Denver, once again, City Council is taking up Councilman Chris Hines' proposal to beef up regulations on e-scooters. He says they're unsafe. He says they're a menace. He says we should ask the companies to do more or take their licenses away. So I reached out to the real human people behind one of the tech companies that unceremoniously dumped these scooters on our streets back in 2018, and they've got their own story to tell. Today is Monday, March 3rd. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. Hi, everyone. I'm here with the Senior Director of Government Relations for Lime here in Denver, Zach Williams. Hey, Zach.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having us.
And also joining us is Lime Senior Communication Manager Jacob Tugendreich. Welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks so much for having us, Paul.
So I'm so grateful to have you two because we've been fighting about these scooters here in Denver for years, but I so rarely get to hear from the actual companies. I get only press releases. This is a treat. Thank you all for joining me.
No, really, really happy to be here. Just as quick context, I actually started with Lime fairly recently. I was onboarded in September, and so really excited to have the opportunity to dive in the ecosystem here.
Well, that's interesting because that is my first question. I want to talk about the history. I feel like we have to address it because there's this trust problem that people have in Denver. I'm sure you all have heard about this in cities all over the world. From that moment when the scooter companies, Lime among them, just dropped like hundreds of scooters on our streets back in 2018, didn't tell anyone they were coming. What's up with that? Why did you all do that?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to take that because I've been at Lime a little bit longer and I cover more of a global perspective. So we've actually been asked that question in a lot of cities, and I think
I'm sure you have.
Yeah. And a big part of the work we've done in the past few years, basically since the pandemic kind of forced a hard reset for the industry, is honestly rebuilding that trust and kind of not only talking about changing the way the industry operates, but demonstrating that and kind of just completely reorienting the way we interact with the cities we serve. We used to say the cities we operate in, right? But now we look at ourselves as a partner to cities. And, that's a nice thing to say, but the way that's actually changed is in those early days of this industry, which is still pretty young, 6-7 years. But in those really early days before the pandemic, you're absolutely right. It was a little bit of the Wild West. It was kind of ask forgiveness, not permission. I think we're really proud of the fact that that is night and day compared to what we do now, where we are constantly talking with the cities we serve. We don't really do much without permission. And we do everything with the goal of constantly improving our service, not just for our millions of riders, but for the millions of other residents in the cities where we operate.
Jacob, I have to say, you're stopping just short of an apology. And I just have to point that out.
I think if folks would like an apology, I think that's more than fair. We are certainly sorry for what happened years ago, but I think we're equally excited about the progress we've made since then.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about today. Zach, I'm coming to you. You're on the ground. You're talking to Denverites, regulators. How does this new approach working for you all?
I mean, look, I started in September. The most important priority for me was to get a finger on the pulse as soon and as quickly as possible. And so for us, that meant meeting with stakeholders of all shapes and sizes, right? So we've met with almost every council office, including Councilmember Hines, multiple times. We've met with downtown RNOs. We've met with DDP on multiple occasions. The Cherry Creek
Downtown
bid.
Denver Partnership.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. It's
right.
a world of transportation is a world of acronyms. If
You're
nothing
in
else.
alphabet soup right now.
We're
yeah,
working
for sure.
on it. No, thank you, Paul. But, so much of this industry turns on having a close and keen ear to the ground and making sure that we're as soon as possible, we are operating on the feedback that we're getting about friction from riders and non-riders alike. And that's my job, is to be that finger on the pulse. And so the last 6-7 months for me have been, finding a way to build those communication networks, get that feedback flowing robustly, and then act on the things we're hearing. That's really important. A lot of this stuff can be solved with simple operational changes, right? Like maybe we have a deployment hub that happens to be in front of a business that is frequented by folks who are mobility impaired. So we move the deployment hub down half a block. It's a simple change that can mean a world of fix for folks on the ground, but it only works if you're on the pulse. And so that's been my work. I have been so thankful to certainly all the council offices that have met with us and our core downtown stakeholders, where, of course, a lot of the ride volume is happening.
All right, you mentioned one council person in particular. That's why we're talking right now. Councilmember Chris Hines, who represents downtown, Capitol Hill, a lot of the center of the city, big scooter areas. He has probably been the biggest opponent of these scooters for years. He is a person who uses a wheelchair. He has talked about personally finding them quite dangerous. And just last week, he has brought forth new data to back up his claim that scooters are unsafe. And he says that data from Denver Health shows almost 2,000 scooter-related injuries in 2024, which was up considerably from 2023. What do you say to his claim that scooters are unsafe?
I think the main thing is that we understand from every city we serve that safety is front of mind for everyone. And I think we appreciate the spotlight Councilmember Hines is putting on just micromobility in general. And, those numbers reflect, a situation that we're hard at work on fixing, right? And what that means is working with the city to invest in infrastructure like protected bike lanes, things like that. It's also about rider education. It's about building new hardware and investing in those resources. And I think that's something that we do around the world. And I'll turn it over to Zach to talk a little bit about what that has looked like on the ground in Denver.
Yeah, I mean, look, every ER visit is a tragedy for those involved. And so never seeking to minimize. It's important to obviously contextualize the fact that rides have grown over those 4 years as well, right? And so the ratio of injuries to rides has actually stayed fairly stable in Denver. In 2024, from the data that Councilman Hines shows, 0.04% of trips ending in the ER there, and in 2024, 0.03%. So that also doesn't account for private scooter use, which has really ballooned in the intervening 3 or 4 years. I mean, you go on Amazon now, pretty easy to pick up an off-the-shelf solution, and we know that lots and lots of folks are choosing their own private vehicles for riding.
So you're saying that's not just you. Those injuries are not just Lime and your competitors.
I think that certainly it's not, right? I mean, Denver Health, I'm sure, is not having everybody check a box for whether or not they were on a shared or private vehicle. But it's just added context. Like the share of ridership that is going to two wheels in Denver continues to grow every month. And when we talk about mode shift and climate goals, that is a critical and important outcome.
I've certainly heard lots of transit advocates make the same point, that this is an exciting new piece of the multimodal transit utopia that we're building slowly. But there is this problem. There's this tension with the regulations where you all say, like, we're giving people the information, we're telling people the rules, like you have to wear a helmet, but then I'm seeing people on scooters. I don't think I've seen a single person wear a helmet. So where do you see the problem in that?
I appreciate that. I want to push back just a little on the idea that there's tension in the regulatory environment, because as I've mentioned at the top, but we've met with Councilmember Hines a number of times. We met with Councilmember Watson and Parity and other members that were there at budget on Monday. And we don't see this as a moment of tension. Like, Denver's regulatory environment has been a bit unique because of the way it was codified back in 2020 and 2021. And in many ways, with Councilmember Hines' ordinance, the regulatory environment will catch up to what other peer cities in Seattle and Austin and DC have been able to do over the last 3 or 4 years, which is to like iterate on these programs, right? And incorporate the learnings from the past year and tweak the rules environment a little bit. And so, look, we have not obviously read the legislation yet, and look forward to an opportunity. We're at the beginning of this regulatory process, but we've made it really clear to Councilmember Hines that we're here to be collaborative and supportive in this. The goal for us is better outcomes for riders and for non-riders alike, and I'm confident we can get there. Well,
you haven't read the legislation. I've seen some reporting on this. Axios Denver has some ideas. I'd love to run these ideas by you, see if you think these are feasible. He said apparently he's proposing, and he's talked about this one before, mandatory sidewalk riding technology that limits where people can ride and how fast they can go on sidewalks.
Yeah, so
is that doable?
Important to note that like sidewalk detection technology has been sort of in the conversation, in the ether of the conversation for this industry for a long time. And we have it. We have the ability to detect riders on sidewalks. We actually are beginning to test out our models here in Denver. We have units in the city right now that are testing the efficacy of the detection model for this city. And by the late spring, we will have units deployed sort of out in the wild, collecting data on where sidewalk riding is happening. The goal, of course, will be to concentrate those units in the downtown core, right? CD10, CD9, CD3, and across the river in North Denver, because we know these are areas of high pedestrian conflict. And the most important work that we can do coming out of those early months of data gathering and data analysis is to work with partners at Dottie, who I want to say very clearly have shown themselves to be aggressively in pursuit of grabbing back streetscape infrastructure and making sure that we have protected bike lanes and parking corrals, right? And so if we can look at the data and say, hold on, we see good bike lane use in most places of downtown, but in these 5% of block faces, we are seeing errant sidewalk riding. That is a pretty strong signal that there's something in the built environment that is making people feel unsafe and is choosing the sidewalk. And so we know that Dottie is really excited about that work. We're excited to work with them on that work and appreciate that Councilmember Hines, is excited about this technology coming to Denver. So it'll be here. We're testing it already here in the city, and it'll be live. Riders won't really know about it for the first few months as we do data collection, but there are some interventions around sort of signaling riders when they're on the sidewalks that we'll explore in the months to come.
That's so interesting. You talk about how Dottie is reacting to this. Jacob, I'm now curious about you. You're working with a bunch of different cities. I mean, do you all tell that to every city that they've got the best Department of Transportation and infrastructure?
That's a great question. I was actually going to jump in because I was going to say that, I think I'm getting the sense from you, Paul, that it sometimes does seem like Denver still has a lot of room to grow in this area. And I think that's true for a lot of US cities. There's European capitals like Amsterdam where bikers never ride helmets or use helmets because there's so much bike infrastructure and it's so ingrained in the culture, right? And we're not there, but a lot of cities are in the US and in North America are really leading the way. And Denver is absolutely in that conversation. And the commitment to build that infrastructure that Zach was talking about with protected bike lanes and things like that has propelled Denver to be one of the leading cities for shared scooter riding. And also it's important to note we have shared e-bikes here too. And so with both of those vehicle options, we've seen over 2.3 million riders in Denver take over 15.5 million rides since we've been here. And so those numbers, I think, help to put into context like just how much the demand and the desire for the sustainable transportation is here. And I think, as Zach is mentioning, it's our job to support that strong ridership, but also keep improving things on safety and things on parking. So the whole program is a plus for all the people who ride with us, but also who just want to get around Denver and maybe don't want to take a scooter or a bike, but deserve to, feel safe, deserve to not worry about it, and deserve, neat and tidy sidewalks too.
I'm curious about these new measures. I mean, you've talked about the sidewalk detection thing. That's interesting. But you all sent me this press release that said you've made major strides on safe riding and proper parking last year and into this year. What are these things? Tell me about these things y'all are doing.
Yeah, I think a good next, we talked riding, let's talk parking, right? Because I think, as you alluded to, Paul, right, this is an issue that, especially for folks like the Councilmember Hines, who, lives in a wheelchair, it can be an existential threat in those moments, right, where a scooter's blocking the sidewalk. Another place, and look, I promise I'm not just trying to put shine on Dottie. I think other cities will attest to the fact that I brag on them quite often. Dottie has done some incredible work building dedicated parking infrastructure for shared bikes and scooters, but also sort of private vehicles all across, especially, again, the core downtown. Lime has also invested. We've built over 100 corrals in the last 6 months that provide dedicated parking for folks in the streetscape so they can get off the sidewalk and down into the street. Oftentimes, these are adjacent to a bike lane, which is the strongest signal that we can send to a rider that, like, you start your ride down here, you jump in the bike lane, and you finish your ride down here. And most importantly, we're working with Dottie right now at Councilmember Hines' urging as well to explore mandatory parking in downtown. So we're still defining the boundaries. I don't want to share too much until we've got it all codified. But the idea here is that in select segments, probably starting in lower downtown, riders will be compelled to end their trips in those parking corrals. And so
like they might get a fine or like a dock on their account or something?
Yeah, and there's lots of ways to sort of work through the actions. And obviously, anytime you go through a wholesale change like that, things like fines and warnings will be applied sort of appropriately. Important to note that, like, we are pretty aggressive about making sure that parking behavior is ethical. We actually have a full-time staff member that sits in Denver, and this sounds like a boring job, whose job it is to review end-trip parking photos and make sure that people are parking appropriately. We've sent out like plus 20,000 warnings since June and over 500 fines since June of 24 to make sure that riders are being held accountable if they do park like a jerk, for lack of a better term.
This episode is brought to you by the Arvada Center. Because their spring musical is opening this month, and it's a good one. Check out A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, opening March 28th. This Tony Award-winning musical comedy is about just how far one poor clerk will go to claim his inheritance. His name is Monty, by the way. Check out A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, running March 28th through May 11th. Paul, I'm going to go see this just based on Monty. Obviously. I didn't name my son Montgomery for no reason. Not after the great theatrical, started in theater, then went on to do Oscar-winning work. Actually, I don't know if he won an Oscar. Montgomery Clift, of course. Tickets are available now at arvadacenter.org. That's arvadacenter.org. That is why you should go see this musical. This episode is brought to you by Clear Creek Makerspace. Ever wanted to laser etch your face onto a piece of toast or 3D print a perfect replica of your precious cat, Mr. Mittens? Or weld together a life-size metal T-Rex for your front yard? Or finally build that beautiful custom kitchen table? No matter what sort of creative project or small business idea you dream up, you can make it at Clear Creek Makerspace. 3D print a miniature of my 1963 yellow Super Beetle. I miss that car. So what's a makerspace? Well, think of it like a gym for your creative muscles. Just 15 minutes from downtown Denver, CCM gives you 24/7 access to tons of high-tech tools that you might not have at home. Think 3D printers, laser cutters, robotics, sewing, crafting, woodworking, welding, and so much more. Memberships max out at just $60 a month, and there are tons of affordable discounts for students, seniors, veterans, and educators. Check out ClearCreekMakerspace.com for free public classes, exciting new special events, membership info, fun challenges, and more. That's ClearCreekMakerspace.com.
Sorry, speaking of parking, hypothetically, if someone were to park a Lime scooter in the Cherry Creek and, chuck it in the water, which I've seen many times,
Sure.
What happens from y'all's perspective?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, often I think what you're seeing is unfortunately not the rider themselves choosing to end their trip that hopefully they enjoyed and gave a 5-star rating and then, for no reason whatsoever, just chuck it in the creek. Often, we'll go look at an end trip photo from that ride, and sure enough, the scooter's parked upright on the side of the trail as it's supposed to be, and some errant actor in the meantime just decided they don't like the vehicles and took it into their own hands. So
if I can jump in on that one, just because it's the scooters in water is a personal passion project of mine and has been throughout my time at Lyman.
Okay.
I think it's the good news is that, and this actually relates to the parking and the system of warnings and fines as well, is that we have found, and our data shows around the world, that most people actually want to do the right thing. And so with parking, a little nudge, a little warning, a little fine, and most people change their behavior right away, usually after the first warning. When it comes to scooters in water, a lot of the kind of image of that being like a major problem that happens all the time comes from those early years when a lot of people viewed shared e-scooters especially as toys rather than part of the public transportation system, right? So people were kind of misbehaving with them, getting used to them, not really thinking about it. And so it was a much, much bigger problem years ago. And then what we've done is we've upgraded, first of all, just our operations team. We always try to continue improving. And so we keep tabs pretty closely on where every vehicle is. And then when one does end up in the water, rest assured that that is like a 5-alarm fire for all Lime employees in the region. And we start working on it pretty immediately. And I'm not ashamed to say that it's usually my goal to try to fix the problem before one of you journalists finds out about it, which is usually means we're working pretty hard on it and going pretty fast.
All right. So we got to talk about this this particular system that Denver has for regulating this. Is we have this licensing system. There's only 2 companies currently licensed to provide these scooters right now. We've talked about this in different ways, and it's important because this is what gives the city leverage to impose regulations. But on the other side, if the regulations are too high, and this is where I see the tension, if you all see the regulations as too onerous, too expensive to be able to make money in our market, you would do like you've done in San Diego and just bail and leave. And then the people of Denver are denied this micro mobility option. What would it take if from a regulatory standpoint for you all to make that decision, that drastic decision to leave this market?
Yeah, I think I can start there. And I think, San Diego is an interesting example, but I think what I would say is that it's much more of an outlier than part of a pattern, at least for Lime. At Lime, we pride ourselves on building long-term partnerships with cities. And what that means is like, we try to assure cities that it's our goal to stay there. It's our goal to keep serving our riders and the entire city. And so it takes quite a lot for us to leave a market. And San Diego is, one city where that happened. But for the most part, these permit renewals, these license renewals are processes that happen as a matter of course. And they're often competitive and different companies bid on them. But one of our pitches at Lime is that, we're usually in it for the long haul if we get there. And so we view these like opportunities for new regulations as a way to make things better and not as something that's hanging over the head of the program that might end up with us leaving, because generally that is not the route we take. It's exceedingly rare for us to look at a new regulation and say we're out of here. And when in San Diego, it was a combination of a lot of different things, but it's very rare.
You guys want to play nice now. This is the new Lime.
Exactly.
I just want to piggyback quickly on that to say again, like we have not sat down and read this specific piece of legislation, but the broad strokes of what Councilmember Hines is talking about and what we've talked about with him and other stakeholders in downtown directly, like none of this is the kind of conversation that would have us talking about leaving Denver. We've invested millions in this city, in infrastructure, in labor, and we have exceedingly high trips here in Denver. We know we are serving a huge population of folks in the city. And so, yeah, we're not playing in that sandbox.
Speaking of the investment, I have to ask, because I rode a scooter for the first time a few months ago, and I found it, I don't know if it was an old one or what, but I found it like kind of tricky to manage the speed. And like, I feel like sometimes these things just get old and they don't work as well. And that's part of the safety problem. So I wonder what's the average lifespan of one of these things? And then like, how can the city be sure that, if we're going to be basically like piecing off this whole part of our public transit to a private company, how can we be sure that we're going to keep that level of investment up to keep the equipment good?
We try to keep them certainly up and running for up to like 4 or 5 years. So none of the ones on the streets of Denver should be nearing their end of life anytime soon. But like we said, we're always looking to do more in terms of maintaining them, keeping them top of the line, ship shape and all that.
Yeah.
And we've got people out doing that. If Zach, I'm sure, can elaborate.
Yeah, no, just jumping in there. I mean, obviously, look, a critical part of why we do this work, right, is going back to what I said about mode shift and taking people out of single occupancy vehicles, right? I mean, Dottie has data that will be released soon from public surveying that went out that asked riders, if you hadn't taken a scooter, what would you have used? And up to 50% of riders said they would have gotten in a car, either their own car or an Uber or a Lyft. And so, 50% mode shift is a hugely important thing across 6.5 million trips in the system when it comes to meeting Denver's climate goals going forward. And just to bring that back to hardware, like that also means that we have to invest in stable hardware that we can keep on the road for. I mean, if we're chucking this stuff out tomorrow, then what have we done vis-a-vis our carbon footprint? And so we are excited. I think we will have some new hardware types in Denver actually coming up this year, some new design devices that are a little different than anything that's on the street right now in Denver.
Whoa, give us a little sneak peek here.
Denver will be one of the first cities to get a new designed e-bike. It's got a lower center of gravity, slightly smaller wheels. It's a little bit more compact. And I think the most important thing that we've seen where we've rolled this device out in pilot programs in a couple key markets has just been that it opens up a broader ridership base. The lower center of gravity in particular, I think makes it a little more stable for folks, especially folks on the shorter side. And so really excited to work with Dottie to figure out how we can get that here, hopefully sort of late spring, early summer. But yeah, I mean, this is it, right? Iterating on hardware without sort of throwing out devices that should be operating for 2 more years, because that's the quickest way to sync all the good work we've done on carbon offsetting.
Zach, I've got one last question, and it's for you because you are a Denverite. You're our neighbor.
Sure.
I want to know, what do you think, if there's any one thing or anything you'd want to say that could help Denverites who are still uncomfortable with these things feel more comfortable sharing our streets?
Yeah, I look, I understand that in the moments, as I alluded to, right, like on-street traffic violence, whether it's from a single occupancy vehicle or anything else, can be a real and a frightening experience. I ride around with my kid all the time and am familiar with that. And so I think by and large, looking at the work, looking at where we, and I say we to mean the collective whole here, right? Certainly the shared bike and scooter industry, but also bike and ped advocacy organizations, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure itself here in Denver, but writ large. Like when we look at where we were 10 and 15 years ago in terms of what the streetscapes looked like and where we're headed, it's a night and day difference. And Dottie, I'll go back to a point we made earlier. Dottie has signaled over and over again that they're ready to be aggressive about continuing to make those investments in making sure that the sidewalks and the bike lanes and the streetscape are sort of built in a way that keeps every user protected. And we will do our part to continue to iterate on and bring the best software and hardware that we can to continue to bring novel rider education, because we know that we got to change it up. We got to try different messages. And most importantly, as I alluded to, my promise to Denver is that I will keep my finger on the pulse. You will see me out there meeting with RNOs and bids and council members. And so that feedback, I will ensure that feedback gets to me, and we'll act on it as soon as we can.
Well, we'll have to keep in touch then, Zach, because
Please
I know
do.
we're not done talking about these scooters. We've been talking about them for years. And listeners, if you have any questions or thoughts or stories of your own to share, we'd love to hear those as well. This stuff is so interesting, and there are shared streets. So call in, leave us a voicemail, send us a text, 720-500-5418. Zach Williams, Jacob Tugendreich, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell that person who looks at all the pictures of scooters parked around the city about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. If you love the show, come see us in person this Saturday at Heyday. It's an indoor fair with a distinctly Denver twist. Get your tickets now at heydaydenver.com. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city.